Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be starting part 1 of a 2, maybe even a 3-part series on the setup of my new Avatar tank. I've been wanting to get this tank done for a very long time. I just filled it up. The Hardscape is completed. That's what we're going to be doing today. Part 2 or part 3, not really quite sure how this is going to go yet. We're going to plant the tank. That's going to be really awesome. So if you're not subscribed yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn notifications on so you know when those videos drop. With that said, let's go ahead, let's go back in time a little bit and let's get started on this tank. Alright guys, here we are at the tank. I've already gotten started a little bit, but I'll catch you up real quick here. So this is a 40 breeder aquarium. It's the third one in the set of 3 that we have here. It's the last one that we're going to be doing in this series, I guess, for these 3 tanks. But let's talk about what we have on it so far. So lighting, we have a Fluval 3.0 light that was donated to me by none other than Aquarium Co-op. It's propped up here above the tank slightly on these super fancy clips. We'll see how much longer those things last. But we also have the backlight in place. So if you remember the video I did recently where I showed you how to make this super simple backlighting setup, it's just clipped on there on the bottom and it's going to provide us with a cool backlight that I think is going to look really nice on this tank. The only other thing that I've done to the aquarium up to this point is add in our base layer of substrate, which is this Latterin that's made by Brightwell. There are 3 different products that I've used here for the bottom layer. They're all just different granule sizes of a fired clay, and that's really going to help plants to get the nutrients that they need. It's an iron source, and it's something that I've been using a lot lately. We have just enough in here to cover the bottom of the tank. I'd say no more than 1/4 of an inch all the way throughout. This is just the bottom layer though, so for the top layer, we're going to be using Brightwell's Rio Cafe XF. XF standing for extra fine. I really like it these days just because it has that small granule size. It's something that you can't get on any other substrate product that I've found at least, and I also really like it because it's this brown color. I think a combination of the small granule size mixed with the brown coloring is going to really help this scape pop and give it the natural feel that I want to have. Let's see if we can get away with using one bag here. I'm going to go ahead and just spread it out pretty evenly throughout the tank. I'm not concerned about having more in the back and less in the front as I typically would, because this scape, as you know, is going to be kind of a unique one. I tend to use more than a normal amount of substrate when I set up tanks because I'm always doing crazy stuff with the Hardscape, but it looks like a 25 bag is the perfect amount to cover a 40-gallon breeder aquarium with just enough. For those of you that are unfamiliar with active substrates like this one, this is going to help to reduce the water hardness as well as the pH slightly to help create that perfect environment for our freshwater fish and plants. Now that we're done setting up our substrate for the aquarium, let's talk about what we're going to be using for the majority of the hardscape on this tank. Now, if you're familiar with the last Avatar tank, you know that we use pretty much all pumice for the hardscape. All the rocks in the aquarium were this pumice, or it's also called feather rock. That's what it was advertised to me as. It is a very buoyant rock, so some of these pieces will float, some of them sink. If they're submerged for long enough, they will all eventually sink, and that creates kind of a problem for us. Obviously, we want to create a floating type aquascape, and so this stuff lends itself nicely to that. It's not perfect though, and we'll talk about that later in the video, the things that we have to do to prepare this to get it the way that we want it to be. There are some different options though for those that don't want to go through the headache that I'm about to go to create this scape. They are man-made options though, and so you've probably seen on AliExpress you can get some floating rocks. They're not natural, they're plastic, and they have a suction cup that will stick down in the bottom of the tank. That's a good option for those that don't want to be as involved as I'm about to be, so I'll try and find a link for that if you're interested in creating something that's similar to this, but just using artificial materials. Let's start over here with a similar looking rock. This is just black lava rock that I used also in this aquarium here. It looks very familiar to the Featherstone. I think it's going to go really well with it, but I want to use a few pieces of this down on the substrate because they're really heavy, they already sink, and I think they're going to go with the scape perfectly. So let's start and let's position some of these rocks around and see what we can create. this isn't the finished product by any means, but I want to give you guys an idea of what I'm trying to do here. So ultimately, I'm trying to create the largest scale possible, or basically make the tank look larger than it actually is. So these rocks are my best take at creating these really high, large looking mountains, and we'll do some tricks later on to make them appear even larger than they are. One of them is using very small plants and some other small little details here and there, but that's what I'm going for right now. I want to create these kind of mountains in the background of the scape and also in the front of the scape as well, by placing some larger stones here in the front. Now it's time that we get started on making our quote-unquote floating rocks for the Aquascape. This is by far the most fun part, and it's also the most challenging part of this whole project. It's one of the reasons why I don't have this tank done yet, is because I knew that I didn't want to do it the same way that I did the first Avatar tank. If you haven't seen the original Avatar video, I highly recommend you check it out to figure out how we set everything up in that tank, but I knew that I didn't want to do that again for this aquarium. As soon as I set up that first tank, I knew that I wanted to do it again on a larger scale, but I also knew that I wanted to do it in a different way. In that tank, we created a scaffolding that was on top of the aquarium, which then suspended our rocks down into the aquarium. What this did was allowed us to get really creative and precise with where we wanted those rocks to be, which was really nice, but ultimately it made it a nightmare to do any maintenance. There was really no way for me to access the tank, and it ultimately wasn't something that I wanted to do again. I knew I needed to do it a little bit differently, but figuring out just how to do that was the roadblock, and I knew that I wouldn't really know the best way to do it until I started to work on the project. So here we are. I'm still kind of figuring it out. Actually, yesterday I prepared the rocks that I knew were going to be floating in the same way that I did before, which was to boil them to get all of the extra air out so that they would all sink. That pumice is perfect to use because most of the pieces are positively buoyant, they're gonna float, but over time they will all sink. Some pieces take a day, some pieces take a week, some pieces will take a month, just depending on their size and shape and whatnot. So there's no way that we can suspend them from the bottom, like with a fishing line and a suction cup down at the bottom of the tank. We need to hang them from the top. The pumice is still a really good material to use though, because it's just nowhere near as dense as any other material, like dragonstone, lava rock, surya stone, dragonstone. Did I already say that? But yeah, the pumice is great because even when it is waterlogged and it does sink, it requires way less tensile strength to hold those pieces up. So after a little bit more thinking yesterday, I decided to just go ahead and get started. I grabbed a stick, I believe it was just a random piece of manzanita wood I had, and I wedged it down into the back corner of the aquarium and rested it up against some of the hardscape that we already have in there. I then super glued that stick in place so it was really strong, and then I took my first floating rock that was dry, it was not waterlogged with the other pieces that I did, and I drilled a little hole in the side of it, stuck the stick into place, and then I super glued it on there really good. It was at that point that I decided all of our floating pieces that we're going to be using today need to be as lightweight and as small as possible. So after I had taken them upstairs and waterlogged them all, I realized at that point they were going to be too heavy to start creating this structure. So now, as we're talking right now, they're up in the oven right now, I think at like 135 degrees, and I'm baking them to get the excess water out so that they'll be more lightweight and easier for me to start to build with. Hopefully they don't end up exploding or getting super brittle and just falling apart. We'll find out. My hopes are that once we start to create the structure of the floating rocks, you'll see exactly what I mean in just a second, that it's not enough weight to collapse the whole thing, and we might have to prop, a stick or two in there in the meantime before we fill the tank up, but we'll just have to kind of wing it and see what happens. The other assumption that I'm making is that collectively all these stones won't have so much positive force on them that they will dislodge the structure as well. Again, this is very much a winging it type situation, and I don't know what's gonna happen, but we'll find out very quickly. Alright guys, after a few days of working on the tank, finally got it finished, at least as finished as I'm going to get it for now. I'm going to be filling the tank up here in just a second. I'll show that off to you guys, and we'll double check and make sure all of our rock formations that we have here are going to stay in place. Cross your fingers. Before I do that though, let's just touch base here real quick on what I did. I mean, you guys just saw it, but it just involved a lot of super glue, a lot of the different types of wood, making sure that they are secure in position, placing them kind of around the tank like roots growing down off the rocks. You'll notice that I tried to put as much detail as I could with the materials that I had on the floating structures. We have the vines that are hanging down there off of the floating rocks. I think that's kind of a nice touch, and we're just gonna roll with it. You know, looking at the tank right now, it looks okay. Once we plant it though, it's gonna look completely different. It's really gonna transform this tank, and if you're not liking the layout now, wait until we plant it. And I think that might change your mind if you're not really feeling it right now. Anyway, let's go ahead, let's fill up the tank and see how things turn out. There we go guys, tank is filled up. All of the floating rocks look like they're in pretty much the same position as they were when the tank was dry, so that's a good sign. I'm gonna keep the tank filled up for a few more hours just to keep an eye on things and see if anything changes, but so far things are looking pretty good. If we look a little closer here on some of the lava rock, you're going to notice a lot of the super glue on there. That's going to get covered with plants later on. Once we plant the tank, this aquarium is definitely going to transform, and it's really going to come together. Try and imagine plants covering the entire substrate. Obviously, we're going to have a lot of mosses on the rocks. Everything just covering the floating rocks, really just green everything up and turn this into a proper avatar jungle, if you will. For those of you that are interested in equipment, we're going to be running a Fluval 206 on this tank. May or may not use lily pipes. I have them, just don't know yet. We're going to basically be running everything the same on these three tanks that we have here. So not a huge difference. We are going to be running CO2 on this aquarium as well, just like the other two, to keep things consistent. So yeah guys, I think that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed Avatar Tank 2.0 setup. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments, and I just can't wait to get this thing planted and really finish it out. So again, this is probably going to be a two-part series. Next video we're going to plant it, so make sure you're subscribed and you have notifications on if you're interested in watching this tank develop. Thanks again so much for watching guys, and we'll see you next time.